Because of the storm, we're going to have two videos, one on the progressives and one on World War I. We're also going to use a new feature of Google where you can ask a question at this link as you read and watch the video. As you read the slides, you can ask a question and we will answer them later. Also, there are going to be some multiple choice questions that will be asked of you based on these slides, and you will be told when you have material that may be forming the basis for a multiple choice question. So you'll take those multiple choice questions on Georgia View when I tell you that the exam is open. It is for bonus points for the course, so you will want to take advantage of that. Now, the progressives have been controversial. I argue that they wanted to cure democracy with more democracy. I have a positive view on the progressives, but many historians are more critically disposed towards the progressives. They don't like them. I like them, so let's see why. They tried to fuse two old ideas, Jeffersonianism and Hamiltonianism, and they tried to seek Jeffersonian ends with Hamiltonian means. That means they wanted to help the little guy, which sounds like Jeffersonianism, but they wanted to do that with strong activist government. Now, many historians have given the progressives bad press. They've cast some shade on the progressives. They were middle-class reformers, so many historians think they only cared about themselves. They also had many prejudices, which we don't admire today. They looked back to a golden age in the past, and they tried to flee the modernist trends that were reshaping American life. The progressives did not like urbanism. They did not like immigrants, African Americans, and as I said, they were atavistic. They tended to look backward. That's true, but I think that we have much to admire with the progressives, even though what I just explained were certainly negatives on the progressives, which we should harshly criticize. Richard Hofstadter was an historian in the 1950s and 1960s who was convinced that the progressives were closet conservatives afflicted with a status anxiety. They felt squeezed between the nouveau riche above them, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, who had so much more wealth and power, and the labor strikers and immigrants below them, which were also changing American life. And so these middle-class reformers wanted to tame both those above them and those below them, largely because their sense of status was falling, and they became reformers to restore an America over which they had been in control. Well, that makes the progressives seem selfish. There may be some truth to what Hofstadter says. He was a great historian, but I think when you examine all the evidence, it does not seem to fit Hofstadter's thesis. By the way, he made this argument in a famous book published in 1955 called The Age of Reform. That might be a multiple choice question. Now, the progressives' goals were to raise the condition of the poor, to elevate the morals of the people, to increase the political power of the people, and they believed that the only cure for the problems of democracy was more democracy. So what I mean by this information is that the progressives look pretty good, although their emphasis on morality strikes us as being rather old-fashioned. But everything else looks pretty solid, looks pretty good. The progressives, again, they were prejudiced. They shared the general racism of the times, and they didn't do much in favor of African Americans, immigrants, and city dwellers, and in some respects they hurt them. But progressives existed at all levels of government, city, state, and national. At the city level, you see people like Jane Addams, the famous settlement house reformer, and you see the city manager form of government established in Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. You also see war waged by the progressives on the city bosses, who ran their cities in such a way as to make the cities work for the immigrant newcomers, but with much corruption. And the progressives were very good at fighting the city bosses, eliminating the corruption, but also eliminating many of the services that the immigrants relied upon that had been delivered by the city bosses. At the state level, the progressives are known for the Oregon system, possibly a multiple choice question. Initiative, referendum, and recall were efforts to allow the people to propose or dispose of legislation passed by the state legislature. In other words, the people could pass laws or recall laws that were passed by the state legislature. They could pass laws on their own, bypassing the state legislature. That's initiative. They could refer previously passed legislation passed by the legislature to a referendum or to an election by having a petition process, and they could recall state officials, including judges, which is quite radical. The states also ratified constitutional amendments. There were 4 during the Progressive era, and the states led efforts to increase political power for the people. You see these 4 constitutional amendments, which really show the power of the progressives. When you pass constitutional amendments, that tends to be forever. And look at these amendments. The Prohibition Amendment, it reflects the progressive faith in morality or their belief in morality. But everything else is either designed to increase the power of the people or to tame the trusts in the case of the income tax. The progressives also established a political party which called for a nationwide presidential primary, direct election of senators, equal voting rights for men and women, and the election of judges. They got the 2nd and the 3rd, but not the 1st or the 4th. At the state level, there were new laws that regulated working conditions for the benefit of workers, such as the Maryland Workers' Compensation Law and the Oregon Maximum Hours Law. And Muller versus Oregon was a court case which established that the state had the right to protect women by regulating their working hours so that they did not work excessive hours, over 10 hours a day. This was a watershed court case because before Muller versus Oregon, the Supreme Court had been protecting property rights and did not pass or did not make decisions which would regulate corporations for the benefit of workers. But in Muller versus Oregon, the court did just the opposite. They ruled in favor of workers over corporations, saying that corporations could have their working hours that they enforced on their labor regulated by the state for the benefit of the workers. Modern-day feminists are not so pleased with Muller versus Oregon, though, because it set women apart as a class to be protected, and that is counter to the idea of equal rights for men and women. The progressive presidents were T.R., Taft, Wilson, and so we see that both the Democrats and the Republicans were progressives during this period. But how progressive were they really? When you look at Theodore Roosevelt, you see 2 sides. First, the bright side. He was the first trust buster. He busted the trusts, which simply means that he enforced the Sherman antitrust law through his Justice Department. He also was the first president to appoint a Catholic and a Jew to his cabinet. So in some respects, he's good on minority rights. He invited Booker T. Washington to the White House, the first African American invited to the White House since Lincoln's time. T.R. also is famous for supporting consumer protection legislation, conservation legislation, and T.R. followed McKinley's practice of viewing the Constitution as something that could be stretched, the elastic Constitution. which is the invention of the modern presidency, where presidents flex their muscles and do everything they can do that is not strictly forbidden by the Constitution. A new view of presidential power, which we see first with McKinley, but on much grander scale with Theodore Roosevelt.